Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the House Government Operations Military Affairs Committee. It is Thursday, May 11th, and we're here this afternoon. We have a number of bills that we are going to see either come off the notice calendar or up for action in the next 24 hours. So we're starting with H490. This is the merger of the Lyndonville and Town of Linden Charter Bill. Mr. Anderson, welcome back.
Good afternoon. Good to see you again. Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel. The Senate proposal of amendment for H490 has three instances of amendment, and we'll call it a security amendment, a cleanup amendment, and a technical correction amendment. So the first, the security amendment, is within the section of the charter that deals with citizen petition ordinances, right? The ordinance initiative section that allowed the residents of the town to petition and vote for the enactment of an ordinance. Senate Government Operations has proposed to amend that section to add a subdivision to the procedures for the adoption of an initiative ordinance. And the subdivision here requires that whatever the proposed ordinance is must be examined by the town's attorney before it is submitted to the special town meeting. When the attorney reviews the petitioned ordinance, they can correct repetitive, unlawful, or unconstitutional provisions. And they may also amend the ordinance to ensure accuracy, clarity, precision in its text, legal references, and phrasing, provided that those sort of technical corrections don't change the substantive meaning of the ordinance. So the town attorney here is given two pieces of authority. The first is that if the ordinance is unconstitutional or otherwise unlawful, they can amend the ordinance to eliminate whatever the unconstitutional component is. If there's technical corrections that need to be made, they can make those technical corrections as well. For reference,
those two things only.
Those two things only. For reference, I think we covered this during the initial walkthrough. There's about a dozen municipalities that have charter authority for citizens to petition for ordinances, and just about half have this exact same language, requiring that the town attorney reviews a citizen petitioned ordinance before it gets submitted to the special town meeting.
And then after that process.
Yeah.
Like this. Questions, concerns about this first instance on this, the security?
The security amendment. Yes. They wanted to secure some of this referenda power. So yeah, 6 or 7 of the 12 municipalities have the attorney review. There's a couple that allow the legislative body to review and decline to submit to the voters if it's unconstitutional. So you could say about 75% of the municipalities with referendum ordinance initiatives require some review before it gets submitted to the town meeting to determine if it's unconstitutional.
Seems like a good addition to me. All right.
The second instance of amendment, you might recall that there was a provision in the charter that required the, quote, ballot boxes to be open for 9 consecutive hours at the municipal meetings. You changed it to be specific to town meetings, not any meeting. Senate Gov.Ops was uncomfortable with the ambiguity of the word ballot boxes. And after speaking with former Representative Marty Feltis, divined that the intent was that this was the polling places, and that the term should be changed so it wouldn't be confused with ballot deposit boxes. So they changed ballot boxes to polling places.
Say that term one more time, ballot, what?
Ballot boxes was changed to polling places.
But then you said that they want to confuse it with ballot. It was 3 words, ballot.
Deposit boxes.
Thank you.
So we've, those of us who are on Gov.Ops, we did S15 or 50, the universal vote by mail, but as we did that, last biennium, this idea that you could have secure ballot drop boxes, I could see where maybe somebody would read it as that. It's great clarity, polling places, instead of ballot boxes. Sounds good. Any questions about that?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense to make that clarification.
Beautiful.
The final thing that Senate Gov.Ops did was a technical correction. There was a list where the list had a conjunction between the first and second item and then had the third item just hanging out there after a semicolon. So this cleans up that list and shifts that and down. And I caught that as I was scanning through trying to figure out what ballot boxes meant.
We've got 3 instances of amendment. Seems pretty straightforward.
That last one, I'm gonna just literally read the words out of the, there's no other way to say it than reading the words out of the calendar.
Yeah, I mean, you could just summarize it too by saying this is just it's a technical correction to make sure that the list is structured correctly.
Fixes a listing error.
This is a listing error. That's the language we want to use. For the one to make it error.
All right. I'll do my best to remember those 4 words. Got them written right here.
Any other questions about the Senate proposal amendment to the Linden Charter? They only, and that huge thing, they only found these 3 little things that they wanted to change. I'm actually pretty proud of our work. Well done. That's good job. All right, I would entertain a motion to,
Straw poll?
yeah, it's a straw poll. So we'll just, all those in favor of concurring in the Senate proposal amendment is 11-0-1. Any opposed that I'm missing? Opposed? All right. 11-0-1 to concur. You can report the straw poll, Representative Moore.
And a work session.
So since they've met beyond
It's on notice. I bet they could pull it. We could suspend and pull.
Changes.
Right?
yeah, well, but I'm just thinking about yeah, let's
I'll just, yeah.
Great, and Mr. Devlin's here, and we're running on time. Welcome back. We're going to start with looking at the proposal of amendment to H-125, the Boards and Commissions Bill.
Thank you very much. I'm back, Chair McCarthy. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. You will have access to the Senate's, let's see. So the Senate passed this out this morning. This is H-125 as recommended to be amended by the, particularly the Senate Government Operation Committee as well as the Senate writ large. And again, this is an act relating to miscellaneous changes to I apologize. The header has the intro language has errors referring to this is boards and commissions. This is the Sunset Advisory Commission's recommendations that were adopted here. And so I apologize for that error in the overview, but it should be the one dated to 10:30 a.m. The rest of the information hopefully is correct. And I want to make sure I do have indeed the right one. The overview has been updated since the last time that this committee has reviewed the material. The SGO's recommendations that were adopted by the Senate are italicized for quick reference. In fact, actually, it may just be easier to reference the amendment itself. There are 5 instances of amendment, and
The first document under your name is the Senate Gov.Ops amendment. Draft 3.1 is what they passed out.
yes, exactly. And Mr. Chair, would you like me to kind of walk through the entire bill and then flip to when it was amended, or just kind of skip to what the Senate changes are?
Yeah, why don't we just go over the changes? Because I mean, the vast majority of the bill, the way it came over, the way we sent it over, unless I'm mistaken, it was the Sunset Advisory Commission recommendations. And then we added our amendment that had the Summer Government Accountability Committee. That was what we sent them, right? It was, and that was it. And they've added a little bit of policy around the ethics stuff here. But yeah, so I think the committee's pretty familiar with the bill. We can probably just go through the changes.
Okay. So then perhaps most easiest to work off the amendment itself. So the first instance of amendment will change some of the language in the powers and duties for that to be established Summer Government Accountability Committee, or Summer GAC. In particular, this is subdivision C, and adds a new number 3. The old number 3 is moved down to number 4. And this is on page 1, line 18, breaking into page 2, and states backing up. Summer Government Accountability Committee shall consider the issue of accountability in the legislative branch, including the following, skipping down to the new language: ways to ensure equitable participation on boards and commissions and in any public engagement process mandated by the state or general assembly by providing appropriate compensation and material support.
That was language that came out of conversations with a couple of members who were interested in the board looking at when we direct, for instance, there's oftentimes this public engagement efforts that are outlined in bills for a board or a council to do, but to create some kind of standards and standardize that. And I've been made aware of that and didn't think this committee would have too much of a problem, but it's just bullet 3 that is new. The rest of it are the items that we had already put in the bill for the summer GAC, right?
Yes.
Any concern about that first instance? Any hands? All right, let's keep rolling.
Okay. The second instance of amendment will have to do with section 4, which was going to amend the compensation language for the chair of the Vermont Pension Investment Commission. The old language that was to be modified by this committee, and this is on page 2, you can kind of see it starting on line 12 there. This committee had the chair of the commission to be compensated from the funds at a level as determined by other members of the commission. The Senate will now change that to the chair of the commission may be compensated from the funds at a level as recommended by other members of the commission and approved through the state budget process. So really just adding that second part as approved by the state budget process. And I believe the Senate appropriations have really anything to alter there either. Okay. The third instance of amendment will add a new section, section 4A, and this pertains to the Commission on Women and their quorum requirements. An existing statute right now, and this is in Title III VSA, section 5025, the Commission on Women would require 9 members to form a quorum, and this will alter that to a majority of the currently appointed members of the commission shall constitute a quorum. The fourth instance of amendment will integrate one of the other bills, and I apologize, I forget the number of the bill, but this committee should, this should sound familiar to this committee as they examined it. This is the Regional Emergency Management Committee's quorum, and the Senate took this and inserted it in here. And one other thing I'd just like to quickly note before actually going into the substance of that, and this is updated by the Senate this morning, the sections that will be added into this bill were labeled as 123A and 123B. It will actually be now 132B or 132A and 132B. There's a transposition typo there. So again, the Regional Emergency Management Committee's quorum, actually the quorum requirements were indeed changed by the Senate. This committee had them, if you recall, being able to just set their own quorum at any time. That's what was being codified. And then there was that interim period where the quorum would be reduced to, I think it was 5 people. But this will actually, the Senate decided to modify that language. And so on line 8 of page 4, you'll see a new meeting quorum requirement codified that will read, a Regional Emergency Management Committee may vote annually at the committee's final meeting of the calendar year to modify its quorum for the meetings in the subsequent year, provided, however, that the quorum shall not be fewer than 20% of the voting members. So it will be These committees will have one opportunity a year, essentially. I believe they meet quarterly, as I recall from testimony. And at the last meeting, they will set their quorum requirements for the next upcoming year, with the caveat that that quorum cannot be lower than 20%. And then the interim quorum requirements in what will be section 132B was also tweaked so that it would be, number 2 was added to that. So number 1, until December 31st, not fewer than 5 voting members shall constitute quorum. Number 2, the committees may vote at any time to modify its quorum requirements for meetings in 2024, provided, however, that the quorum shall not be fewer than 20% of voting members. The 5th instance of amendment is, we'll add a new section to the bill, 139B, to be titled Report on Municipal Ethics. And this has to do with the State Ethics Commission reporting back to this committee, as well as its sister committee in the Senate, with its recommendations for creating a framework for municipal ethics in Vermont to be due by January 15th, 2024. And see, I can point out on line 8, there's a little bit more substance to what they'll be reporting on. It's shall include a summary of issues relating to the creating a framework for municipal ethics and a summary of any relevant input received by the commission drafting the report.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Representative.
Oh, just, you said 139B, and I think I'm looking at 139A.
It is 139A, sorry.
Yep, no, that's all. I
Apologies.
just want to make sure.
Representative.
My question is, this is singling out municipal officers having a code of ethics. So why not, like we did with something else, roll it into the whole State Ethics Commission, if that is what it's called? What was the Senate's thinking on pulling out just municipal folks?
Unfortunately, I can't really speak to what was offered in testimony that day.
My understanding is that while we have the power to just and have already basically said, you know, the state legislature and executive officers and all of the government down to, and if we end up eventually passing the language that's in the current version of 429, county officers would be included by statute. And so my understanding, right, that this is just a report on how we might also include municipal ethics.
Indeed.
So it's sort of like looking down, and you'll recall there have been, in the last decade, a number of municipal officials that have been caught up in embezzlement schemes and that kind of thing. We've had part of the, I don't know, trend, I guess is what to call it, of going to appointed clerks instead of elected has been a large part of result of that. So this was a recommendation that came from Director Sivert's office at the State Ethics Commission to have us look into what it would take to pull municipal officers up into the umbrella and consider that.
And this doesn't specify appointed or elected, so it would be both. And if 429 doesn't pass, it would not include any county officials. So county officials would continue to be excluded from being examined for ethics violations.
I don't think there's any question that we have the power statutorily, or that it would be, that there would be any logistical question about the county officials coming up under the state ethics code. When we get down to municipal officials, because of their independence, and they're kind of figuring out like what's the appropriate way to have a state code of ethics apply, it gets a little bit trickier. So I don't know that I'd like, I think with the county ones, we should just do it. You know, we should just make them part of what's brought up under the basic code of ethics. But with municipal officials, there's so many of them that I think this was just a way to say, we should look at this.
Okay, I didn't realize the nuances of the municipal officers. So, thanks.
Representative.
Just for my clarification, a little bit different than what I think you just said. I mean, I'm reading here, the report shall include specific recommendations on how to best provide cities and towns with informational resources about basic ethics practices. So that's not saying that we're, considering imposing this on them. It's basically saying, look, here's what some of our recommendations came out of this study, and if you want to move forward with it, good to go, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I read the first sentence, recommendations for creating a framework for municipal ethics in Vermont, that could be every town adopts its own code of ethics and enforces it themselves. That could be the state code of ethics applies. What is that framework? It's a little broad here, so I think.
I'm glad it's broad. I mean, yeah, I don't think we should be, jumping down municipalities' throats right now with their own, or our, statewide ethics.
I agree.
But this has a light touch, right? We're just
Right,
looking at it.
That's why I want to make sure that the way I was reading into it, it wasn't right touch, right?
Any other questions about that last instance? All right, so we've got 5 instances. Representative Rowicki, this is, you were the reporter here. Do you have any questions for Tim about any of these, or you feel like you have what you need?
I don't. I think what I looked at from what came over from the Senate is, especially at this date, it's reasonable to say that this works.
I like that they got our RAMC quorum issue on here, save us a couple of votes. That's a little efficiency. So if there are no other questions, why don't we take a position on this one? So all in favor of concurring with the Senate proposal of amendment? All right, we've got a unanimous 12-0. You can report a big vote on the floor. We're going to move on to H476. I have to step out for just a few minutes. I have read these, so Mr. Devlin is going to kick things off, and then I'll be back. I think that...
Did they message that over to us, 125?
125 was messaged today, so it'll be, that's a good question. So if we'll have to, we have to get rule suspension, I think, to even concur tomorrow. So that might be one that we have the leadership talk about, our boards and commissions bill. The bulk of the bill is winding down a whole bunch of commissions and doing the usual cleanup. So
That's 125.
H125. It's actually on there. It says S.
Oh,
It's just
yeah.
a typo in one. It's actually H. Oh, it's already fixed. It's fixed.
Andrew's already.
Yeah, it is
She's
H125.
just trying to confuse us.
Yeah.
All right. Great.
All right, moving on.
I'll be right back.
Thank you. Yes. All right, Mr. Devlin, let's chat H476.
Okay. So H476, the committee should have an updated overview for this bill as well, and that'll be of the Senate Government Operation Committee's amendment to 476, again, or an act relating to miscellaneous changes to law enforcement officer training laws. And the Senate Gov.Ops formatted their amendment as a strike all, and this is, I believe, what the Senate, I can't recall off the top of my head exactly where it's. They hadn't changed though. And again, just for everybody's refreshing the memory, this implemented the recommendations of the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission 2022 report. I've noted where the Senate Government Operations version departs from what this committee passed out. And really that's just running through a very high level, and I'll return to this in more detail. Section 1 wasn't modified, Section 2 was, Section 3 was not. Section 4, 4A was added, 5, 5A and 5B were added, and then 6 was not. So there are significant changes, more so than the last vote we just spoke about. And will, knowing that section 1 has not been modified, and again, that was about the model policy to be adopted, updated. Skip to section 2. Again, this is session law that will require the Vermont Law Enforcement Advisory Board to update the domestic violence involving law enforcement model policy by January 1st, 2024. And there were a few modifications to some of the terminology that was used. And this is on page 2 of the amendment. Changing terms of those who experienced domestic violence to apologies here. I'm just trying to find exactly what was changed. Sorry, in number 2, it was modified to identifying existing support offered to law enforcement agency employees or officer who is a victim of or the person who committed domestic violence. So adding specificity there. In number 3, we had the term changed to, again, victims of or persons who committed domestic violence. And in 4, develop processes to protect the privacy of agency employees and officers who are victims of domestic violence and to maintain confidentiality of any information shared by these individuals. So victims being specified and then these individuals later. And that is the change in terminology there. Section.
Well, that one's that.
Sure.
Representative Waters Evans.
Thanks. I have a question about, so in B1, so it'd be line 10, it says address domestic violence survivors' needs. Are survivor and victim interchangeable here? And is there one that's preferred over the other, or is that intentional, or?
That is a good question. I believe the Senate worked with the network to replace this, but I'm trying to think of the other folks who testified and I'm drawing a blank right now. But I think generally speaking, the term survivor and victim are referred to here synonymously, even though perhaps one could argue that there should be a uniformity and be one may be preferred over the other, but they are.
My understanding, I thought, was that survivor was preferred over victim, and is that correct? No?
I would be able to share.
Sure.
Thank you. The domestic violence, the network used the term survivor when they were testifying to us, and law enforcement used the term victim when they were testifying to us. And I made a note of that in my notes because I also thought that was kind of an anomaly or whatever. I just didn't think inconsistency.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think they are using the terms interchangeably, but the network prefers the term survivor.
Is it too nitpicky to make them the same throughout?
We can ask that question. We have Charity, Attorney General Charity Clark coming later. Perhaps we can ask her opinion on that at 2:00. We're gonna run through this with Mr. Cohen right now. We're gonna take a time out until she arrives and the chair returns.
Yes, just.
We'll have that question there.
Words on the page.
Yep. We're doing words on a page right now.
And those are words.
Yes.
Thanks.
Back to you, Mr. Devlin.
Section 3, and we now turn to the part of the bill regarding officer misconduct and transparency of information. Section 3 has not changed. Section 4 is indeed a significant departure in formatting, but really maintains largely the same substance. Section 4 will amend Title 20 VSA Section 2407, which is titled Limitation on Council Sanctions, First Offense of Category B Conduct. And the committee will recall this is kind of that idea of do people who commit certain type of Class B misconduct kind of get a second bite at the apple before misconduct, before the Vermont Criminal Justice Council can act on it or not. And so what the Senate proposes is a rewriting of that section for clarification, essentially just kind of reorganizing it to clarify which types of conduct the Vermont Criminal Justice Council may take action on in the first offense. The one substantive difference is that the Senate's version will also enable the VCJC to take action on the first offense for conduct that involves sexual harassment involving physical contact. That was not on the list of items where the VCJC could act on the first instance of. This committee had only added the new subsections or subdivisions H and I. And so Senate went a little bit further there. So I'll pause there for a second, see if there's any questions.
Everybody's good to keep going.
Okay. Senate adds a new section 4A, which will require the Vermont Criminal Justice Council to report back to this committee and the Senate Sister Committee on whether current statutes pertaining to law enforcement officer unprofessional conduct should be amended to apply to all off-duty conduct, I believe, which was a matter debated here. 2, whether these statutes should be amended to adjust the scope of conduct that the Vermont Criminal Justice Council may take action on for first offense. And 3, any other recommendations deemed appropriate by the VCJC, which is going to catch all.
Representative Ango.
Thank you. What is the involvement of the Office of Professional Regulation in this?
Let me double check the language of 4A. I believe it is, they're not involved. Although it is a credential, or the Vermont, in order to be a law enforcement officer who practices law enforcement duties in the state, the law enforcement officer certification is a credential similar to a license, but unlike most of the licenses which are regulated by the Office of Professional Regulation, this is that certification solely within the purview of the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, largely speaking.
I guess I was just wondering why OPR is named that they need to be consulted.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Sorry.
Is that because
Not clear.
they deal with the issuance of it?
Sorry, I had forgotten that the Senate had put them into 4A there. Fortunately, I can't really speak to the reasoning behind that.
Ask that question.
With who?
Chair comes back and maybe he has some insight on it.
Okay.
Five A was modified by the Senate. 5 was also modified by the Senate. And this is the section that will modify Title 20 VSA Section 2409, having to do with accessibility and confidentiality of information relating to these conducts. And this will require the Vermont Criminal Justice Council to collect and annually report aggregate data regarding domestic and sexual violence and complaints of category A and B conduct involving domestic or sexual violence resulting in the filing of charges or stipulations for the taking of disciplinary action. And the Senate added in the aggregate data there.
Representative Haley?
Yeah, I noticed that Senate's ended with January 15th. Should I have a date as well after that?
Year. Let's see. The shall provide. This is line 18. Yes, I imagine. Actually, sorry, let me just read this quickly. So this is codified language, not session law. This is council shall collect aggregate data on a number of A, B, then 2, shall provide a report pursuant annually on or before January 15th. So no need for a year, just it happens annually.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, I see. Thank you.
The next part of the bill, sections 5A and 5B, were added by the Senate. This has to do with the Vermont Criminal Justice Council domestic violence training position and its funding sources. 5A and 5B together will remove two references in statute that provide funding for the VCJC's domestic violence training position. In particular, removing reference to funding coming from the Domestic and Sexual Violence Special Fund, created by 13 VSA, Section 5360. Testimony provided to SGO indicated that this position is now entirely funded by general funds to the Vermont Criminal Justice Council. And in particular, 5A will amend Title 20 VSA, Section 2365 to delete that reference to that funding. And then Section 5B will amend Title 13 VSA, Section 5360, which is the controlling language for that special fund, and will also delete the reference that the funds may be used for the VCJC domestic violence training position. And then that leads us to Section 6, the effective dates, which has not been altered by the Senate.
Any further questions for this stage of the game?
It's great timing. You guys walk through all the changes without me. Sounds great. Representative Pango.
Thank you. This is a question for you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if you know the answer, but we were questioning on Section 4A if you knew why the Senate wants the consultation with OPR, the VCJC, to consult with OPR for this report.
This is in 4A.
Yeah.
Statutes pertaining to law enforcement officer and professional conduct. These statutes should be amended to adjust the scope of conduct.
It's the paragraph before that, right in the beginning. On or before December 15th.
Yeah, if I was to venture a guess, and it may be that the Attorney General or her office may be able to comment on this, but I think that the reason they're asking DHR and OPR is because they're looking at how is this done in other professions. So they're broadening the scope and saying, why not treat law enforcement or at least consider on these issues, how other professions deal with these policies, but that's just a guess. I actually don't know.
And the other professions are licensed or registered or certified by OPR. My question, I guess, was, are law enforcement agencies certified, regulated, or licensed by OPR?
No, they are by the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, which is why the CJC is doing the report, but they're consulting with those other two, would be my guess. I haven't talked about that report back in depth with Senator Hardy.
I think I'm okay with it as long as it's the VCJC getting advice on how to oversee, rather than OPR making any decisions or offering any recommendations.
So the way it's structured, it's Criminal Justice Council is doing the report, but they're consulting with DHR and OPR, right?
I just didn't know why. Thank you. I think I'm good with that.
Educated guess there, but maybe our witness on this might be able to confirm. Were there any other questions that came up in
Yes.
the walk? Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Or do you want to, Shay? You can ask.
It's all the same to me. In section, where were we?
2.
2, I noticed that in the first line, it says, okay, so it's on page 2, and it's line 10. It says the updated model policy shall address domestic violence survivors' needs and leverage best practices, et cetera. And then the rest of that section, it refers to those people as victims. And I was wondering if there was a reason or a difference between the two, or if not, if it should be uniform instead of saying survivors in one place and victim in another. And Representative Hango said she thought that law enforcement agencies use the term victim and that the network prefers the term survivor, and that perhaps both of those items of language got mixed in. But
So, Tim, do you have any feedback to give us on the use of the word survivor or victim in this context?
In this context, because it is session law and it is really a directive for the Vermont Law Enforcement Advisory Board to put together a model policy. I don't know if it's necessarily prescriptive in the terms that the policy should refer to. I can say they are being used synonymously here, whether that's appropriate or not. I think this is another question, as well as a question of if one is preferred over the other. But I will perhaps defer to another witness more expert in as to what term is used in reference to criminal law versus policy at large, and what those differences.
Why don't we ask, since Senator Vyhovsky's here too, and she was the reporter, we can ask her a little bit about how this came together.
right on.
So any other questions about the words on the page for Tim? Okay, great. Thank you, Tim.
Very well.
Senator Vyhovsky, would you like to come up next? Welcome back.
Thank you. For the record, Senator Tanya Vyhovsky, Chittenden Central, and I was the reporter of our proposed amendments to this bill. There wasn't any in-depth discussion about which language to use, and I think that Senate Government Operations would be perfectly fine if they got unified.
My feeling is I want the bill to get passed, so I'm not going to be a stickler now. I think we probably want to. I'm hearing in your question a preference for the use of the word survivor. And I don't know where we're at in terms of updating that in terms of the style guide for the VSA that Legislative Council uses.
I do think it's important that it is session law, so it's sort of transitory.
It won't be codified.
Not worth holding the bill.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to throw that out there. So Senator Vyhovsky's zooming away from just that particular conversation that we were just having. Is there anything you want to tell us about kind of the approach that Senate Gov.Ops took to the changes in the bill, and what were some of the highlights of what y'all heard?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started out on this bill, and you may know this because as it left your committee, there was some opposition to the bill. And so we tried really hard to navigate something that everyone could feel good about. And we did land there. The Department of Public Safety supports this bill. The sheriffs support this bill. The network supports this bill. So we were able to get to a place where everyone felt like they could support this. And that really was our starting point. We also made some changes. So one of the, I think the most substantive changes and what held it up on our side in appropriations was the funding for the Criminal Justice Council's training position for domestic violence is being moved out of the domestic and sexual violence special fund and into the general fund. What we heard, and that has been appropriated for, what we heard is because of the way that special fund is funded, the funding is getting lower and lower and lower and lower, and they're not actually able to meet all of the need. So we moved that position out into the general fund. It's likely that next session we will probably have to look still at additional funding mechanisms for that special fund, which funds the network against domestic and sexual violence, amongst other things. But we wanted to make this change to sort of bridge us to the point where we can have the larger conversation about how we fund that fund. So that was kind of one of the biggest things. We also added some language around the conduct occurring off duty. Given that we're talking about domestic and sexual violence, we found it somewhat unlikely that that would occur on duty. And so we added in that off-duty language, and we had to work with the Department of Public Safety about where and how to do that in order to not make it apply to everything always. And some of that, looking at other things that might be included in those off-duty sanctions, it was tasked to the Criminal Justice Council in their overarching review of the training systems and the sanctioning system. And they are already underway. That was a 3-year project that was funded to really take a deep dive into training and accountability. And this language is meant to make sure that they look at this part, but not to undermine the overarching work that they're doing on that. And they did agree to the language in here to look at category B offenses and which one should be sanctionable on a first offense and which one should have the off-duty applied to it. But in terms of domestic and sexual violence, we felt like it was pretty important to add that modifier. And then the other piece that we added in the category B offenses that can be sanctioned on first offense was sexual harassment that includes physical contact. That was added to the list of offenses that could be sanctioned on a first offense.
And that would be on-duty sexual harassment.
I believe that one's actually also on and off duty, but I'm not 100% sure. This is where we worked really hard with DPS to place off duty in the right place so they felt comfortable that it applied to the right things and not everything.
We almost got there in our version.
And so we worked, like I said, we worked really closely with the Department of Public Safety to place that in what they felt was exactly the right place to capture what we wanted to capture and not what we didn't want to capture. And there was a lot of back and forth about it. So I have to be honest, I don't quite remember what ended up being captured and what didn't.
Tim, this is up at the top of page 5. I'm orienting myself to this new construction of how category B cognitive listed because
we restructured it. It didn't fundamentally change it, but it restructured it because the way that it was reading now as we were doing it was exceptions to exceptions rather than just listing what we are talking about. And so we restructured the whole thing to try to be more clear as to say, this is what we're talking about, as opposed to having exceptions to exceptions.
So it references sexual harassment involving physical contact pursuant to subdivision 2401A, 24012A.
The Criminal Justice Council testified that all category B offenses should be sanctionable upon first offense. We added that one and tasked the Criminal Justice Council to take that deeper dive and report back what should be and what should not be sanctionable upon first offense.
Okay. Right. So now it's a list of category A and then all the B that's sort of only first offense and then category B.
Right. Whereas previously it was exceptions to exceptions. It was just confusing. It doesn't fundamentally change anything but that one piece, which is the addition of sexual harassment with physical contact. Just thought it was clearer.
Yeah, it looks great to me. I had talked to Senator Hardy about it in concept, but really appreciate you all kind of taking what we did and going a step further. It sounds like both committees stopped short of wanting to give, at this point, the Criminal Justice Council the discretion to just, if there's a category B or unprofessional conduct, to take it up on the first offense. And did you all talk about that in?
We talked extensively about it in committee, and one of our drafts did in fact include that. And it created enough of an uproar that we felt like it was worthwhile to pause at the one piece and then explicitly call out in the work the Criminal Justice Council is doing with all the stakeholders to look at that as a possibility. So that's where you look at those couple of things that we've explicitly enumerated in the report back. I think we put that in there, just knowing full well, and this is what we heard from Commissioner Morrison, is that they are doing the deep dive into what should be sanctionable and how should training happen in terms of the whole policy, and that it was a little premature to start grabbing things piecemeal, given that they're doing that deeper dive on everything. And she said, we may well come back and say, yes, you should do that, but right now we just haven't completed our work to know that that's what we should do.
I think the last question that came up in our discussion was Representative Hango's about the report back. having Vermont Criminal Justice Council in consultation with the Department of Human Resources and OPR and how OPR came up into that. This is the Section 4A law enforcement professional regulation. This is a report back by December from VCJC in consultation with the department, looking at statutes pertaining to unprofessional conduct, on and off duty conduct. The scope is category B. So there was a question about OPR, what their role.
So it was a larger conversation, and it sort of works in conjunction with the other police training bill that we had around certification and training and whether or not OPR should have a role or should not have a role. And so we felt like it was important that they be in consultation as we think about the broader scope. And because of the way we crafted this bill to sort of be in line with the work that we're doing, we wanted to make sure we included their voice at the table as that bigger conversation about certification is happening.
For me, I like the idea that the office that holds a whole bunch of professional regulation and has all these disciplinary processes that are really expert driven. I mean, you have your medical board that's really holding doctors accountable for their licensure, and nursing board has nurses, so it's professionals that are doing that work, but they're in the business of the structure and the maintenance of that. So that makes a lot of sense to me, but.
And that is why we wanted them at the table as they're taking this really big dive into certification and training. We wanted the office that does professional regulation for most of, thousands of professionals in the state to have a seat at the table, to be, discussing best practices, to be looking at like what might it look like? Does it make sense for this to come under the purview of OPR? Maybe not. Like, it just really felt like they had a valuable expertise to bring to the conversation.
Any other questions for Senator Vyhovsky? Thank you so much for giving us the context. It's always hard this time of year when we're like, we want to compare, but we don't know, how did they go?
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And I'd like to invite Attorney General Clark to give her thoughts on this, because we're kind of coming full circle now. It's been a long few months, little journey for this bill. Thanks for being with us.
Right. Now it's hot in here instead of being cold in here. Charity Clark, Attorney General. I just like want to reflect for a second and say how grateful I am to this committee and how excited I am that we are where we are. This commission makes recommendations every year, and they're not always given. In fact, I don't know that they've ever been given the kind of due that this committee gave them this year. And I'm just so excited and grateful for your taking the time. I know it was a lot of time, and I really appreciate it. The co-director of our Community Justice Unit and Assistant Attorney General, Erin Jacobson, has been following this bill. So I was glad to see her here, and also Senator Vyhovsky, because I won't be able to answer any specific questions, having sort of pieced out of the process by the time that it went to the Senate. But I'm back to tell you that we continue to support the bill in its form. All the changes made in the Senate are okay by us. And, we're here if conversations develop and you're thinking of making changes, so we can weigh in quickly and let you know our thoughts on them, because we know how things move quickly at the end of the session. But so we wanted to come in person and let you know that we support the Senate proposal amendment.
Any questions for the Attorney General? Thank you for your work and the support for Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission. And I imagine we are taking this step, but there's still some more work to do. So
Yes.
we'll be seeing you again next year.
Yeah, probably. We'll see. I don't know if it'll be this committee. We haven't finished the review yet, so we'll see. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, committee. Are there any other questions or concerns before we take a position on the Senate proposal of amendment? I just want to say it was great I think that we did really good work here. There were still some outstanding concerns from DPS and others when the bill left our committee. It seems like this restructuring of the way category B is listed and the way we talk about on and off duty in this bill has addressed a lot of those concerns, and appreciate Senator Hardy's committee picking up where we left off and making some improvements. So
I'm definitely in favor of concurring, but does anybody have any last words on this? So all those in favor of concurring? Any opposed? That's a 12-0. Representative Boyd, you'll be working these changes out on the floor. Great. Before we break, is there anything else flying around that we need to take a position on today? Representative Bigley.
Just noticed that Ways and Means did 12-0-0 on our fire district number one.
Oh, good.
Do we have to, in a sense, appreciate and concur with theirs, or is it, or they're just good to go?
No, if they, their report on our work, unless they had any amendments.
They didn't change it.
Nope.
Then we can, they'll just give their report favorably on our bill as amended by our amendment. And then, if, leadership agrees, we could pull it up pending its entry onto the notice calendar now that it's out of its last committee and, put it in all stages today and get it messaged over to the Senate so that there's a chance to get it out of here before we leave.
Got that lined up, so hopefully we'll have it.
Higley, I appreciate your partnership in convincing everybody to move that along for those 140 customers and maybe a few more. Great. So I'm just looking at my bill tracker before we head out here. Taking a position on 490. Those are gone. Take a position on 476 on 125. And 470 is on its way. So we are getting close here. So the last one that is kind of outstanding here, and I wanted to confirm with you, Representative Byron, did our miscellaneous cannabis bill get messaged?
Miscellaneous cannabis bill has been messaged per the website.
Okay, so that,
There are small changes to review, but it was all things that we discussed.
we could review that first thing in the morning, though, and it wouldn't make any difference.
No, I don't believe it makes a difference on calendar math.
Okay. And let's plan on doing that. We'll put the position on 70. And Michelle Childs would be the, yeah. So
What time tomorrow morning? 9:30.
Right, so look at 9:40, 9:45. Yeah, it doesn't need to be a long one.
You're setting that calendar, but it ain't
All right, let's break it.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, committee, thank you so much for all the hard work on these bills. I'll see you back on the floor. I think we're scheduled for 3.
I thought we were
They moved it up to 2?
I got
Well, I haven't heard the bell yet,
stretch.
so-
I got to stretch.
Oh,
I think
when
that's
the bells start ringing.
It's a loading too.
All right, well,